And for once, we are on to another Pokemon Trading Card Game History video. Chilling Reign, the final of our 2021 season sets here. This set is huge. There's over 230 cards in it, so we're starting to creep up into that territory that Fusion Strike is going to end up enabling. Can't wait to cover that one, huh? That's probably going to be like a 5-minute thing. Who cares? We are looking at more single strike stuff over here. We've got more of the fun rapid strike things as well. A lot of decks kind of come into their own in this set. And of course it's Chilling Reign. This is the second DLC set. We have a horse. And more horses over here as well. These cards are super good. Can't wait to get into them, but there's plenty of other stuff in here that's worth noting as well, including a whole ton of trainers this time too. Surprising just how many we actually see here. There's over 30 trainer energy stuff. Pretty good. The main sort of archetypes, I guess, that come out of this one are lots of dark things, lots of the, as I say, the horses get their own thing here as well. Lots of cool artworks that we will see as we go through with that as well. And yeah, the Galarian birds are kind of neat too, especially the Zapdos and the Moltres. Also, Rapid Strike does more stuff. We didn't mention the trainer stuff. There's an archetype within the trainers that starts off here as well, the gloves. We technically saw like the struggle glove, I'm pretty sure it was before, where it's like you do 30 more damage if you are weak to the opponent's Pokemon. This time we get specific type ones, so we have metal, we have fire, we have dark, and for some reason we get grass to begin with. Why they felt like they had to nerf grass type Pokemon even further to start off with is anyone's guess. This should have been Psychic, right, as the first one that came out, because that was like the other best deck of the time, but hey, that is just how they decided to do it, I suppose. If you have this as your tool attach and you fight that type of Pokemon in the active spot, you do 30 more damage. A Choice Band is a good card as far as I remember, so yeah, these do see sporadic play. Mostly the water one and occasionally the dark and psychic ones for good type coverage, basically. Otherwise, the supporter cards are mostly good in here. There's only a couple which we're not going to look at. Agatha is a very weird one. I'm sure I've seen this in something somewhere. It moves up to 3 damage counters from your active Pokemon to the opponent's active Pokemon. Very strange effect, to be honest, but on like really rare occasions this can come up. I'm struggling to think exactly what would even want this right now, but it's the kind of supporter you put one of in your binder and maybe eventually you'll find that one deck that can use it. Somebody's got to like genius level play this in order to get it out, I guess, but hey, cool effect to have. Unlike this one, we haven't seen this in our testing just yet, but Avery is a dick. This guy, I mean, I don't like him just from a design perspective, let's just put that out of here, but you draw 3 cards, and if you drew any cards with it, the opponent's got to discard down to 3, which is gross. I know most of the time this is just going to be like discard the Dedenes or the Crobats and stuff in play, but a lot of decks need a large bench to set up. Think later on, like the Inteleon decks are a good example, but like think later on as well with the Gardevoir decks, Refinement, etc. This just slays that deck if it gets used at the wrong time. So yeah, very irritating card to have around. So bleh, whatever. Brawly is an interesting card specifically for the Rapid Strike Malamar deck that we'll take a look at as well. This searches your deck for up to 3 basic Rapid Strike Pokemon, puts them onto the bench. The cool thing about this is it's a Rapid Strike card, which means it is searchable, but also works with the attack of the Malamar that we'll get to later on. It's fine. Like, these sorts of setup supporters haven't really seen a lot of play since the turn 1 supporter rule changed, but the fact of this one is searchable and also useful for the combo kind of makes it a bit better overall. Flannery is a really strong card as well. Single strike tag doesn't matter as much as the rapid strike, but there is a support item we'll get to that can make that matter. You discard a special energy from one of the opponent's Pokemon and also discard a stadium card in play. Stadiums are about to see quite a bit more play because of a certain one that comes out in this set, so yeah. Also yeah, getting from the chat over here. Pepper is of course mentioning Eternatus happens to have a bench size of 8 and will have to discard 5 of their Pokemon in play. So yeah, fun stuff with that too. Single Strike supporters continue with Karen's Conviction. This one's probably the most fitting Single Strike supporter that exists because it actually works with the Single Strike idea. The Single Strike Pokemon will do 20 more damage to the opponent's active for each prize that they have taken during the turn that you play this card. So it's like Iris from the end of Gen 5, but bigger. And that can really matter. If the opponent's knocked out one of your Urshifu VMAX, you do 60 more damage with the next one here. That can easily swing numbers even if you don't have all of your Single Strike energy in play, but it also like multiplies with that as well. This thing can easily get to VMAX one-shot numbers, and use it at the right time, it's going to be very powerful. Problem is it doesn't do anything beyond that, so you've got to be a little bit choosy about when you use this one. Clara is a really strong card overall. This is Ordinary Rod, except it goes to the hand instead of the deck. You can put up to 2 Pokemon and up to 2 energy, basic energy, from your discard pile into your hand. So you immediately get to recover the resources that you need for the turn, and also can further develop, especially in a single prize deck, you can further develop the Pokemon that you need to recover and just like keep reusing. Very, very strong card. Sees a lot of play in a lot of different decks, even if they aren't always single prize ones as well. Melanie is really, really good for the Ice Rider deck, and we'll see a ton of play in other decks as well as we move on. Attach a water from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon V and draw 3 cards. Doesn't have to go to the bench, which is really strong, but it does have to go to Pokemon V, and I really hate that it says that, because there's a lot of decks that would have been enabled to be super cool if you could just attach this anywhere that you wanted. Which, yeah, screw you, Melanie, I guess, for that. Peonia is quite cool. This is our prize digging tool, kind of like Gladion was in Generation 7. You put up to 3 of your prizes into your hand, and then for each prize card that you put into your hand, you have to put one of your cards in hand face down. They can be the same card that you've just picked up. So if you don't need that card until later on, if it's a situational one-off or whatever, you place it down and it's totally fine. You do not have to shuffle your prizes after using this, which means you know what 3 of your prizes are going to be, which is really, really cool. So yeah, strong card to have. Peony is also pretty good, but it takes a very specialized deck to use, I think. You have to discard your hand to use it, but you search for any 2 trainer cards and put them into the hand. There's a few situations that this gets used later in the Rhydon deck specifically, because you can search for like a Electro, I forget what the thing is called, the Electro Charger thingy. It's not Charger because that's one of the old cards, but the one that accelerates energy. That's pretty useful, but also this can be used with search cards is also pretty solid, and if you have a Snorlax in the active, well, that just draws 7, right, at the end of the turn. Yeah, Mew is the other big one that could use this, again, from chat here as well, because Mew has Genesect to draw a ton of cards, so yeah, fair and balanced, right? In theory, right now, you could use this with Silvally in the similar sort of way, and just draw a bunch with that too. It's probably not worth it, but it's kind of cool nonetheless. The stadium cards that we have this time is one that blocks healing, so the Cheryl stuff from last set isn't as powerful this time round. Still a stupidly strong card, but at least there's technically counterplay to it now. You gotta find a stadium before you play the Cheryl. Cool, I guess. Old Cemetery is an interesting one for Psychic decks in theory. If a player attaches an energy to a non-Psychic Pokemon from their hand, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. There's not a lot of Deluge style effects or Rain Dance style things that actually see play right now, so this isn't really going to come up very often outside of the 1 attach per turn, and that's a bit of a shame. In theory, it's supposed to help Shadow Rider, but they just have better stuff to do, unfortunately. Then we have Path to the Peak, which is one of the things that they can do. This is Power Plant, but bigger. Pokemon with a rule box in play do not have abilities. So this is all of the EX, GX stuff that we had before, but also, of course, Pokemon B, so now we can hit Crobat with this as well. But also it's going to hit things like Prism Star Pokemon. Tapu Koko Prism can't accelerate while this is in play. Later on, Greninja, Radiance, and stuff like that will not be able to use their stuff either, so yeah. And yes, a mountain is of course usually bigger than a power plant, that is true. But this is just one part of the mountain. Ever thought about that? It's just one road on the mountain. That might not be bigger than an entire power plant, let's be real. The items and energy stuff are kind of neat here, although this is not really the first one to go with to like really put that into perspective. I don't know. Echoing Horn is stupid. Let's just put it as it is. This is Pokemon Flute all the way back from the original base set, or Target Whistle if you remember that from Gen 6. Put a basic from the opponent's discard onto their bench. It's now a Rapid Strike card, which means those decks can search it and then put a Pokemon like Crobat onto the bench, which can then potentially get sniped by Rapid Strike, G-Max Rapid Flow, and get one shot. So, yay for that, I guess. I don't know, the Rapid Tag doesn't come up too often, but it is possible for Artillery to search this, so it's worth noting anyway. Fog Crystal's broken. Like, I know I say that about a bunch of cards sometimes, but this one truly is. You either get a Psychic Energy or a basic Psychic Pokemon from your deck into your hand. It's Netball, but without the ball tag, I suppose, but it's for a much, much better type this time. Unfortunately, Ball Guy is in Shambles, however, because you just can't get it with this. But that's fine, because it means that you can just go ahead and get your basic. It doesn't even have to be a non-rule box Pokemon, so you can get the Calyrex and just go from there. Absolutely stupid card. Gonna see a ton of play until it rotates. So, yeah, really nice. Welcoming Lantern reads insane until you realize that the Single Strike supporters basically suck. This is Versus Seeker, but for Single Strike Pokemon. Supporter cards, not Pokemon. Any supporter card that is of that tag from the discard pile can get put back to the hand. Good for Karen's Conviction. Not really good for anything else, to be fair. Like, you could technically use it to recover Flannery, and that's kind of cool, but Flannery itself is really situational, so If you've had a KO last turn, you could use this to get back Bruno, and that's kind of neat. But then there are better things that we could do if you've had a KO last turn, like probably Rosa is a good example, right? So even that's kind of lame, and if you're not getting any of those, then there's just nothing really to do with this that's like any good. So yeah, Versus Seeker this is not, unfortunately. Galarian Chestplate, I almost didn't put this in because there's like nothing really to use it with ever, but this is basically the entire reason why stuff like Obstagoon or Berserker have Galarian in their name, even though they don't technically need to, because they're not, you don't need that distinguisher. If they have Galarian in the name, however, they take 30 less damage from the opponent's attacks, which is cool. That's actually a really strong effect when you think about it, but there's just nothing to do with it that makes sense, right? The Galarian Pokemon, they're not completely awful, not universally, but there's certainly no deck that would take advantage of this, and it ends up just being a situational big charm for the most part, and like anything that you would want to put this on probably has a better option, so yeah. There's two scrolls, just like the last set as well, that give your Rapid and Single Strike Pokemon extra attacks. They're both pretty bad, but this one's searchable at the very least, and it's like a Psychic-based attack, even though it costs Lightning Energy. We'll get to why it costs Lightning later on. And the Single Strike one costs Fire, which is really stupid, but like, I guess it 120 without any effects on the opponent is kind of okay, not really. Why aren't we just using G-Max One Blow? I don't know. The actual reason these are Lightning and Fire, like cost-wise, is because we now have Rainbow Energies for the Single and Rapid Strike respectively. This is of course very useful for the Rapid Strike in particular because it's searchable. A bit less useful for the Single Strike because they just don't really have a way of using this very well, but oh well. Unlike the previous stuff, I guess more like what Rapid and Single Strike Energy are like, you cannot attach these to anything that isn't tribal. because if it goes to something that isn't tribal, it gets discarded. Big, downside on that. They do technically have a plus side as well, though. You can't be poisoned if you have the single strike energy one on you, the impact energy, and you can't be paralyzed if you have the spiral energy. That technically can come up because auto paralysis stuff does actually happen from time to time in the format. There's a Zekrom at the moment that can do auto paralysis, so it can come up, but it's really not too great outside of the fact of it's searchable, and Octillery being able to get this, pretty helpful. These are designed to be used with those off-type Pokemon, like the Luxray from the previous set, or Blaziken down here as well. This is a Rapid Strike Pokemon. They're designed to be used to get these to play nicely with the rest of the archetype. It doesn't do a good job of it, I'm afraid. And then lastly, we have Lucky Energy. This one lets you draw a card if the Pokemon it's attached to takes damage. Simple as that. So the main deck that's going to use this at the moment is the Blissey, that we'll talk about in just a sec. But honestly, any deck that can play Colorless Energy as its sole cost, you could justify using this just to be a bit more resilient to Marnie. It's pretty good. Then we get to the Pokemon, and there's like 45 of them here that I think are at least worth noting, so you'll forgive me for being a little bit more quick-paced through some of this stuff. Dr. Bees over here is a really cool single strike Pokemon that you generally only use with the single strike Mustard supporter, because getting a stage 2 into play like this is not really worth it, but for a single grass energy, this will auto KO any opponent's active that has a special energy attached, which is a lot of them. So Beedrill over here can do some really good work. This does see play in decks going forward, because taking free prize, just like the previous Beedrill actually, taking free prize cards for the cost of 1 basically, because this is going to get KO'd next turn, right, is really, really good. And special energy aren't going anywhere. We have an insane plethora of really good specials right now, and it only gets better when double turbo energy comes out, right? So this comes into play a lot, and yeah, it's a really, really strong card to have. There are a few decks that it will get stuffed by though, just because they don't play special energy. Those aren't very common though. Jet Spear for 1 grass is not super good. You don't generally play it for that, so you mostly just play Aurora Energy with this a lot of the time, so you don't want to discard those. The Weezings I think are hilarious, so I think it's worth noting them anyway. They are 130 HP Pokemon that basically work together to do a bunch of damage in a Dart Pulse style attack here. For 2 energy, Smog Burst does 20 for each of your Darkness energy in play, and 20 base damage, so that's kind of cool. But in order to get enough energy in play, you have the other Galarian Weezing, which doubles your basic Darkness energy costs. Or not energy costs, your energy attachments. It doubles their value, so long as they're attached to a Pokemon that has Weezing in its name. Yeah, we get the best Weedle art in this one as well, but that is all the way over here. Artwork appreciation moment. There you go. Why is it doing pull-ups on a tree? Who knows, but it's trying its best, and that's great. Yeah, so the idea is that you want to attach a ton of energy to your Weezings and whatnot, maybe energy switch them over from the Moltres we'll talk about later on, and go from there. But the problem, of course, is that it just is way too slow right now. Maybe if we had Dart Patch, but we don't get that until way later into the format, and it's probably just not worth it. Still a fun idea though, and I thought it's cool to note regardless. Blissey V is a very silly card. 250 HP on a basic V is huge. There's only one Pokemon that beats that, of course, and it is Wailord at 280. But unlike Wailord, this is actually kind of good. If anyone remembers the Mysterious Treasures Blissey that I always railed on because the card was basically carried by Cessation Crystal, this is functionally that Blissey. When you attach an energy from hand to it, it heals all the special conditions from it. That literally doesn't matter because it's going to play Path to the Peak the whole time. Blizzle Blast for 1 energy does 10 damage, but it does 30 more for each energy that's on this Pokemon. Basically 40 as a baseline here. Once you have done damage, you can then attach up to 3 energy cards from your discard to this Pokemon. That is any energy, which means, being in a colorless thing, this basically abuses every single busted colorless energy that we have in format right now. Yeah, it does attach the energy after instead of before, which is irritating because it means you don't get the bonus damage, but you also attach 3 times the amount of energy that you used to. This card is genuinely good and is going to see quite a bit of annoying play as we go forward, so keep an eye on it. Porygon Z I want to mention, even though we're just about to hit rotation and the really cool Porygon Z is rotating, because if this came out last set, it would have been ridiculously good. If you attach an energy from hand to it, then it confuses the opponent's active. Very funny, technically, with the Salazzle stuff, but not really going to be playable in that, I'm afraid. Super Beam for triple acceleration energy does 170 and discards 2 energy. Cool. I mean, it's a good middle ground thing. It hits all of the relevant single prize stuff, which is pretty good. And it has special energy acceleration in line until next set when it rotates. So yeah, kind of cool though. The Galarian Articuno is neat, at least. It's very, very niche though. You discard 2 cards from your hand to draw 1, kind of like a maintenance sort of thing, except you discard instead of putting back in deck. Very rarely you will see this played. It's kind of like the bigger alternative to Galarian Meowth, which actually draws a card instead of just being like nothing. I don't know. It's not very good otherwise. You can at least Fog Crystal for it if you're playing Psychic anyway, but I'm not sure what you would want in the discard in that deck, so yeah. Zapdos, pretty good. Only 200 HP is annoying because it can be a pretty good like threshold number to hit, but for each of the opponent's Pokemon V in play, the attack of this thing costs 1 colorless less. So it eventually, if they've got 3 Pokemon V in play, next format is going to be even bigger for that. Thunderous Kick will do 170 for a single fighting energy, and discard a special energy from the opponent's active before doing damage. There's a key distinction there because that means that, say, Lucky Energy wouldn't actually be able to trigger, which is really good. Also, yeah, this just straight up one-shots Eternatus, and that's really cool because that card is dumb. Galarian Moltres is a hard once per turn, which is a very rare thing to see in Pokemon, but it lets you attach a Darkness Energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. Really, really good. Also the bulkiest of the 3, although it doesn't matter too much because its own attack actually damages itself, so it's technically the frailest of the 3 if you actually attack with it. This card sees a lot of play in a ton of different decks going forward because Dark is a really, really good type right now, and will continue to be a really, really good type going forward, so yeah. 2 Dark and a Colorless is also pretty playable in a lot of decks as well when you're accelerating the 1 Dark from discard. It means you can use Capture Energy with this thing as well, which is pretty good. So it's got a lot of synergy with a ton of stuff. And if you need to one-shot a Dark Weak Pokemon, this is your bird. It's a really good card. Blaziken, not so good, unfortunately, but it's a Rapid Strike Pokemon. It's a Fire-type Rapid Strike Pokemon, so that's already putting minus points on it because it doesn't play nicely with the Rapid Strike energy, in theory, but it actually does when you look at it proper. Because we're just going to skip straight over the V, there's nothing to talk about there. The V Max is kind of neat. 320 HP, 2 Retreat, so it's Air Balloon and Tower Waters compatible. And its main attack for double colorless, aka Rapid Strike Energy, does 130 damage and doesn't discard anything. It chooses up to 2 of your benched Rapid Strike Pokemon, attaches an energy card from the discard pile to each of them. That means you can recover those Rapid Strike Energy that you have discarded with like Gmax Rapid Flow if that's what you're doing with it. It is on a free prize Pokemon, it doesn't do a lot of damage, and it's kind of annoying to like use for that, but we don't have Earn of Vitality in Rapid Strike, so this could be useful for that. Its first attack is also sort of neat if you use that energy from the Rainbow Energy from before. For a single Fire Energy, 60 and stop the opponent retreating actually can matter in a lot of games as well, so some decks do get hosed by that. Kinda neat. Curlier is awesome later on. I wish this card was great now, but we don't quite have all the pieces for it yet. This has water duplicates, except on a Psychic type. Search your deck for up to 3 Curlier for a single Psychic Energy, bench them. Super, super good. Obviously later on in Astral Radiance, I think, is when we get the Refinement Curlier. This gets a ton of play then with Gardevoir EX coming out in Scarlet Violet. It just gets ridiculous, right? So that's obviously super powerful, and this frees up your routes that you still have on the bench to be rare candied into Gardevoir or Gallade. Both of them are pretty good here. Gardevoir sees a lot of play later in the Gardevoir EX deck as the main non-EX attacker. You just draw 2 cards once per turn, and basically draw 2 anyway, and any energy that are there, as long as they're basic energy at least, any basic energy you find there will go onto your Pokemon however you want, which is just insane, to be honest. Its attack is also pretty good, 60 for triple colorless, but it does 30 more for each psychic energy that's on this Pokemon. Baseline is 150. That's actually pretty good for a single prizer, to be honest, but with its own ability you can kind of charge it up even further and just get more going for it. Yeah, this was the workhorse of the Gardevoir EX deck, and stupidly strong card. Just a little bit annoying to do at the moment because we don't have the Refinement Curlier, so bit of a shame. You're probably more likely to charge up the Gallade. There's a huge HP difference between these two, by the way. Like 140 versus 170. Like, what the heck is that all about, right? Gallade itself has 2 pretty good attacks. For a single Psychic Energy, it does 60. Okay, sure. I mean, it's early game stuff. It's not bad. But Dynablade is super strong for a Twin Energy. 60 for each of the opponent's Pokemon V in play. Now, the problem is we now have, like, the Inteleon engine is at full power, so we're probably not going to have more than about 3 of those Pokemon most of the time in play. 180 for a Twin Energy is still good. You still one-shot Eternatus for that, right? But it's not as strong as you would hope, because it's easy to play around, and that's always the bad part about attacks like this. Still a fun card, though. Castform gets its last, like, good card. Man, this might be the last cards that Castform has gotten actually recently, but they're all somewhat neat. They've got, like, what, they're all 70 HP, I'm pretty sure. They've all got 0 retreat, which is kind of neat, and they follow the Rotom pattern of, like, if you have X amount of, in this case, Stadium cards in your discard pile, you get to just ignore all the energy in the Pokemon's attack costs. Unfortunately, unlike the Rotom, most of their attacks kind of suck. Like, 150 and you have to discard Stadium in play. How many Stadiums are you expecting to have for this, right? If you have 8 in the discard which you need to play the attack, you then need like a 9th Stadium in order to discard for this? That's like garbage. Castform, the Snow one, does like 120 and can't use it next turn. I mean, that's fine, it's dying anyway, so that's fine. The Rain one is the only one you might actually play for the attack, because it can be used without having to be like stupidly invested into Stadium cards. 20T to the opponent's Pokemon has seen play before, of course, in a very powerful card from Sun and Moon called Tapu Koko. That was for DCE though. This takes a water as well, which is a bit more annoying. And then Weather Force is Return, draws until 6 in hand, but yeah, not particularly good. But they do have 0 retreat, and this guy did see top level play, so yeah. Banette is an interesting card. It is effectively the Frostlass, but for Psychic type now. Turns out Psychic is a better type to be for that at the moment, right? Put up to 7 damage counters on this Pokemon for a single Psychic Energy, 20 damage for each one that you placed this way. It is Psychic, so the single strike thing doesn't necessarily matter that much for it, but I mean, hey, it's a tribal tag, you might be able to use that sometimes. There's a couple of cool things you can do with it, and I mean, it does hit Urshifu for weakness, which is pretty important, so yeah, quite a strong card in its own right, I think. Maybe with Karen's Conviction you could actually one-shot the VMAX, that would be fun, right? Speaking of Frostlass, it does have a card here as well. When you evolve into this thing from hand, attach a water energy from your discard to any one of your Pokemon. It's level ball searchable, which is pretty good, and also Scoop Up Net is quite strong with it too. Get to recover a good amount of energy from the discard. It does go to the active as well, so you can use this quite a few times during the game. Maybe it's like a one-of in water decks, like the Ice Rider could technically use it. It's probably not necessary, but it's a cool card to note nonetheless. Metagross is useless in his base form, so we're just talking about the VMAX here. It is a Rapid Strike card, so you might be able to get some use out of the tag stuff for it, although it's not a 2 retreat mon, so you can't use Tower of Waters exclusively to retreat with it. Gotta play an Air Balloon as well. Zap Traction is the main thing here. You search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into the hand. It's kind of gross because it's basically Sylveon from Sylveon GX specifically from the early Sun and Moon block. Unfortunately for it, it does not have an evolution advantage type ability like the Sylveon did. So it's a bit slow to get going. Its attack is also just about as bad as Sylveon's really. 100 damage for 2 is like fine, I suppose. Does technically do 250 if it stays in play and like doesn't get put to the bench and all of that fun stuff, but it's just not there, unfortunately. And yeah, it's also not a water or a fighting Pokemon, so you can't use Rapid Strike Energy, so basically next, right? Abomasnow is cute, but probably unnecessary for the single strike stuff, but just to note it anyway, you have 50 extra HP on your single strike Pokemon that aren't Abomasnow specifically. It's a hard once in, like you can only apply one whilst it's in play, but since single strike stuff does damage itself with the Houndoom Roar, this might come up, I suppose. Too much bench space really, but 50 is a high number to hit, right? So you could do some fun stuff with that. Cresselia is mostly used with a Shadow Rider deck at the moment, but this is effectively Don't Steal My Homework Bro from Volcanion from before. It's literally the same card as the Volcanion single prizer that we've had already for quite a while. That is rotating, to be fair, but Psychic is a better type right now, so this works out. It's got 1 less retreat, which is kind of important. Its attack technically doesn't need fire energy exclusively. It needs 5 energy instead of 4. It does 120 instead of 110. It's the same goddamn card though. Basically you play this because if you go second and you get this into the active spot, you can accelerate 3 psychic energy out of your deck, which is really, really good. I guess the one important change actually is that it has to go to the same Pokemon. One of the really beneficial things about Volcanion is that it could go to any Pokemon. This one has to go to just one, so it puts a big target on that Pokemon. This might not be as good as Volcanion was in the end, I don't know. Liepard I think is really strong. When you bench it, it just rips a tool off of one of the Pokemon in play. Can be one of yours as well, that might actually matter for some decks, but for the most part it's just like take a tool off of the opponent's Pokemon and just dump it. The only thing that's bad about this card is the fact that it's a Pokemon V, which is good for the fact of Liepard would be playable if it was a stage 1, but it's bad because Path to the Peak just exists now, and it might not get played because of that. But the card is really good. Shadow Rep is kind of nice as well. Like you can just put all of the cards attached to it back, like itself back into the hand, right? 110 damage, a little bit weak, but you know, not too difficult to get going. And it takes the 2 prizes off the board, gets to reuse it too, so kind of cool. Zepstriker I like, but is not like super good here, I don't think. For a single energy, you can do 120 if you did a Rapid Strike attack last turn. The main thing that I would use this with is Keep Calling from the Sobble that we'll talk about in a sec, because that is your setup attack, and then this lets you do 120 next turn, which is kind of neat. Tornadus is not amazing, but for 1 energy it does like 20 plus 20 if there's a stadium in play, which Tower of Darkness would be played with this quite a bit, so that's, I guess, kind of cool. You can do 60 with a single strike energy, so that's good for the early game. The VMAX is what we're actually looking for here though. For 4 energy, the attack we were interested in does 120, double that if you have a if there's a stadium card in play, but then you have to discard that stadium. You really do need to play a ton of like Tower of Darkness for this. You probably also have to play something else alongside it though, which is where it starts to lose me a little bit. But it does do 240, which can get buffed up by Single Strike Energy and or Karen's Conviction, so you can start getting one-shots with this as well. I think there's like just about something there, but this is like the 60,000th mid-tier like VMAX that we've had, it's not great. Because 4 energy is way too hard to charge up. Yeah, as Pepper's saying in chat here. Just awkward. Yeah, Powerful Colorless does exist for this too. Like, you've got all the damage mods in the world for it here. It's just so hard to get going at that point. It feels like you would want Porygon Z with this rather than Houndoom. That's how, like, difficult it is to get going. Thunderous is not amazing, but these kinds of attacks are always worth noting because they come up in random, like, one-offs from time to time. For 1 lightning energy, you do 30, and you may attach a lightning from hand to one of your bench Pokemon. It's fine, right? Usually you want these to come from the discard pile, but they can come from hand sometimes as well. We had a Moltres that did this once, and like it was reasonably okay. So yeah, it's worth noting these kind of single prize accelerant attacks, sometimes they might come up. Malamar! This is an entire archetype in its own right. 120 HP, 40 damage for a Psychic Energy, per Rapid Strike card that you shuffle from your hand back into the deck. You do have to reveal them all first, because obviously you could cheat if you didn't. So you get to choose how much damage you do, and also you can technically do unlimited damage if you can get your hand large enough. This deck's kind of hard to play, and it is very sort of difficult to set up right now, but the potential is certainly there. It is a Psychic type, which is really good, and despite not being able to use Rapid Strike energy, it doesn't matter because it's 1 energy in its attack, right? And the Rainbow energy that we just got can also be shuffled back into the deck as part of the attack. The fact that we just got Fog Crystal for this as well makes it very doable, just tricky to use. Lycanroc is not particularly good just because, unfortunately, unlike the Malamar, this only counts single strike Pokemon for its attack. But its attack has a lot of potential damage-wise if there are enough Pokemon that were worth using. For 2 fighting energy, you do 80 plus 10 for each single strike in your discard pile. The plus 10 kinda kills it, but I mean, again, single strike has got a lot of damage multipliers, right? You only need 1 Houndoom plus an attach return in order to keep this going, and single strike energy, of course, buffs up the damage as well. In theory, it's decent. Every time one of these dies, you get an extra 20 damage as well, so like you sort of set it up, but it's just not quite there. It's not good enough, unfortunately. The Persimmon is definitely a lot better. This lets your Rapid Strike Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to the opponent's benched V and GX Pokemon. Can only apply 1 of these at a time, but this works with Telescopic Sight in order to do plus 60 to those Pokemon, which now means Gmax Rapid Flow can one-shot a Crobat on the bench. 180 damage. Stupid stuff. You always play 1 of this, basically, in any bench sniping Rapid Strike deck, and honestly, there's a lot of bench sniping Rapid Strike decks, so yeah. Tapu Fini, I think, is better than one would initially give it credit for. It is essentially very similar to the Suicune that was played in Todd's Inteleon deck, the Inteleon VMAX in one of the Players' Cups, but this one has a tribal tag and also works with Rapid Strike energy. Smash Turn for 1 water puts 30 damage on your opponent, and you can switch this to the bench, which is kind of good. It would set up the Coordinated Bolt and other similar attacks from the Zeraora over here. Sets up stuff like that, which is kind of good. Ocean Loop for 2 water and a colorless does 120 and puts 1 energy, any energy from this Pokemon to the hand. So you can put the Rapid Strike energy back in hand and preserve it, basically, and then use it on something that's more important later. It's not too bad. 120 is not a huge number to hit, but considering all the tribal synergies and stuff with it here, it's respectable. It's a solid enough single prize attacker if you need to hit, you know, with a hit and run style attack, I guess. Or if you want to set up for the Zeraora over here. 210 HP Rapid Strike Pokemon. It does have the single attack here. It's really weird, actually. Most Pokemon at this point would have 2. Whatever. 1 lightning and a double colorless to do 100. Not very strong in the slightest. But if you had a different Rapid Strike Pokemon use an attack last turn, this also snipes the bench for 160. Are you kidding me? Yeah, so this effectively is like a mini Tag Bolt from your neighborhood friendly Pikarom that happened to still be playable for like ever. It only does 100 to the active, which is really annoying, and the energy cost is quite large, but the theory is that you can attach a Rapid Strike energy from the discard using Blaziken to this thing, and that's a Rapid Strike Pokemon that did an attack last turn. So then you get one more energy on this thing, and you can do big hits from there. And 160 with the Throwing Coach or Telescopic Sight is enough to one-shot Crobat on the bench. If you have both, it's enough to one-shot a lot of basic Pokemon V on the bench as well. 220 is very respectable. So yeah, get your Muse out against Rapid Strike or you will die is basically what we're seeing here. Rillaboom I think is like okay. Most of the Rillaboom decks played a 4-4-3 line of Rillaboom. This could be the fourth one that gets added in because it's a single prizer in a deck that's usually just tag team and VMAX cards. And Raging Repeated Strike is like a decent enough attack. For 2 Grass and a Colorless, not really a difficult cost to pay in a Rillaboom deck. 120 damage, discard any number of energy from your Pokemon in play, and do 30 more for each one you discarded. The multiplier is not super great, which is unfortunate, but you usually would have like 2 other Rillaboom in play, and that kind of makes it reasonable, right? Because if you have 3 energy on this, you discard them because this is probably dying next turn anyway, and then 2 other energy in play, that's substantial, right? That's like 270 damage, which is pretty good. So, I don't know, it's kind of alright. Just expensive, right? But it's a single prizer, whereas normally you're attacking with a free prizer. I think that's a good trade-off. Cinderace kind of surprised me in the testing that we've done, like the first test session anyway. This is surprisingly good. Cinderace seems to have a lot of those cards right now that are just like, they're actually not terrible. Single strike Pokemon, so it does benefit from the energy and Karen's Conviction, which is pretty good, and that benefits with the ability that we have here. This is essentially a mini Charizard from nowadays. This does 30 more damage for each prize card the opponent has taken. Its base damage is 150 for 2 energy, which is only 30 less than what Charizard does nowadays as the best attacker in the game. Kind of insane. It can't attack in consecutive turns, but it's usually dying most of the time anyway, so that's okay. But it also only has a 1 energy retreat, so it's quite easy just to move it out the active if that's necessary as well. It only takes 1 Houndoom to fuel this because it's a fire and a colorless, so you can still play regular fire and you can use single strike energy with it as well to buff this damage even further. Yeah, it's pretty good. You could technically mustard it, as Pepper's saying in chat, but the problem is single strike mustard is searched from deck, not from discard, so that feels really bad, to be honest. However, at the end of the game, if the opponent's taken like 4 prize cards and you're a single prize deck, you're not necessarily giving up multi-prizes very often. You can do like 270 sort of damage with this, scale it up just a little bit further with the single strike energies. You can start hitting like one-shot numbers very easily. This card is surprisingly good, actually. Sobble is insane. Like, let's just say it how it is. This card revolutionizes the game because it is a Rapid Strike Pokemon that searches for Rapid Strike Pokemon for a single energy. And that means that you can now have all 4 of your Sobbles in play just like good old Froggies did in the past with Water Duplicates. That means that next turn, with Level Ball being a thing as well, you can then just get multiple Drizzles in play and search your deck for whatever the heck you need. This card is great. The only problem is the 60 HP, which does actually matter in certain matchups moving forward. Looking at you, Lost Box. So you gotta be a bit careful about that. Inteleon as a Rapid Strike card, we're skipping the Drizzle because the Drizzle is bad. Inteleon is an interesting Rapid Strike card as well. It is Kingdra from Kingdra Prime specifically from way back in the day. That card was busted. This card is also really, really strong. Put 2 damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon once per turn. You may know this actually more as Decidueye GX in more recent times, but this is a Water Pokemon. It's Kingdra, let's be real. The fact if it's a Rapid Strike card does sometimes matter. Its attack is terrible, but if you're playing Inteleon Urshifu, maybe you need to put a Rapid Strike energy on this at some point and hit with Waterfall. I have seen worse, so yeah, 70 damage for a Twin Energy, not a lot, but it adds up with the damage it's doing itself anyway. Very, very strong card. Sandaconda is neat. This thing takes 30 less damage from attacks, so it's effectively 250 HP. That's really, really bulky for a standard Pokemon V. Kinda cool. It evolves into the Tornado Snake himself, Sandaconda VMAX. 320 HP, so on the frailer side of these newfangled ones over here. I don't know, I mean 320 is obviously a really stupid number, but you really would like to be the 330, 340 range for something like this, because it's a shower card. For one fighting energy, you do 60 and 20 to each of the opponent's bench. For 2 fighting in the colorless, it does 180 and rearranges your energy on your board however you like. This means you can move all the energy away from this Sandaconda so that you can heal it after it takes a hit. And of course it's a 1 energy attack anyway, so you get to do whatever you want. It's a really fun looking card that way. Unfortunately, we have a lot of one-shot stuff now, and this might not really be playable because of that. Still, spread deck stuff, really cool. Maybe a little bit better post-rotation when we lose Mew though, we'll get to that later. The Urshifus do get a single prize version this time round. The problem is that Kubfu is not single or Rapid Strike, which basically kills the playability of Rapid Strike Urshifu here. For 1 water in the colorless, this does 30 for each of your Rapid Strike Pokemon in play. Oops, if I couldn't evolve all of my Kubfu, then I guess I just don't do damage. Really a shame too, because 180 for a Rapid Strike energy on a single Prizer would have been insane. There's probably still something here, but it's definitely way worse than you would hope for. The single strike one I think is just too expensive as far as its energy cost goes, but its attack is very powerful. For 2 dark in the colorless it does 100, but if you have any damage counters on you, you do 100 more. Which means single strike raw, put 1 damage counter on the thing, suddenly put 2 damage counters on that, suddenly you do 220 because of the single strike energy. That again is really, really good for a single strike Pokemon. But it takes free energy. And I think that might just be a little bit too difficult to keep getting into play. You're gonna run out of steam with this card, unfortunately. Zarude I'm mostly mentioning because of GLC, because it's really good in that format, but Pack Call is a fun attack at the very least. You search it out for any grass Pokemon and put it into the hand. If you go second and it's your first turn though, you get 3 grass Pokemon instead of 1. The problem of course is this is just like, please dear god Marty me now, because they don't go into play, but oh well. Repeated Whiff is the kind of attack that single prize formats really like. Does bonus damage for each grass energy on it. Not enough to break into competitive, but still. And the ones we've all been waiting for, let's talk about the horses. There are promos for these, the basic Vs, but the promos are terrible, so we're not even going to mention them beyond that. 210 HP on both Ice and Shadow Rider Calyrex over here. The VMAXs are both 320 HP as well. Kind of interesting because the Ice Rider is actually really bulky, so you would have thought this would have hit 330. Anyway, for 1 water energy this does 40, sure, it does sometimes come up in the early game. Glacial Lance, if you can't evolve into the VMAX, is like passable. 200 discard 2 energy, it takes 3 to do. I mean, in desperate times, right? You really want to go for the Ice Rider VMAX though, and this sees a lot of play in a lot of decks right from the start of its, like right now when it came out. It's kind of neat. For 2 colorless energy, Ride of the High King does 10 plus 30 for each of the opponent's bench. It's a Mind Jack from Zorark. It's kind of neat. 160 on most situations, that's pretty respectable. But Max Lance is where we're at here. For 2 water, it only does 10 damage. It's 10 plus on everything here. But if you discard water energy, you can discard up to 2 and do 120 more for both of its, both the energy you discard. You can scale it how you need to, which is neat, but most of the time if you're not discarding 2, Ride of the High King is going to do more damage, so keep that in mind. 250 for 2 energy, discard 2 energy, really, really efficient, powerful attack. Sees a lot of play with Palkia later on as well. And right now, like, it gets carried because Melanie is just a busted engine to use with it. So it's kind of like the new Welder deck sort of thing, I guess. This card is really strong though. Very efficient in terms of what damage it can do. It's only a 2 retreat too, which is ridiculous. This thing's slow as hell in the video games. But somehow Regieleki is a free energy retreater, right? Go figure. Shadow Rider for 1 psychic energy does only 10 damage, but it locks the opponent from using special energy or stadium cards next turn. They cannot play them from their hand, which is very annoying, to be honest. You don't usually play too many special energy from outside of your hand, so some decks are just going to get cooked by that. Astral Barrage does not read 1-hit KO 2 of the opponent's Pokemon in play, which it should do because that's how much damage it does, but for 3 colorless energy it chooses 2 of the opponent's Pokemon and puts 5 damage counters on both of them. Does do damage counters, so technically it gets around Mew right now. That's kinda cool, but that's a lot of investment for not a lot of damage there. You will very, very occasionally see this come up, but it's not the sort of attack to rely on. The VMAX, on the other hand, this was supposed to be like the tier 0 mega threat sort of card out of this set. This reads as one of the most broken cards we have ever seen. The ability Underworld Door attaches a psychic energy from your hand to one of your bench psychic Pokemon. When you do that, you draw 2 cards. This is energy acceleration and draw on 1 ability, which is not a hard once per turn, it is a soft once per turn. This card reads like it should just win the game automatically. However, its attack is not actually that good until you get several turns worth of setup. For free of any energy, it does 10 damage. Once again, this 10 plus thing. Don't know why they did that with the Calyrex actually, it was pretty funny. 10 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to all of your Pokemon. Yeah, this reads insane because it is basically just Welder as an ability, which is unbelievably strong. But that attack takes so long to get going that it isn't actually that good by itself. You need like 3 turns before this is even good at starting to attack, which is awkward at best. However, the good thing for this card is that there are pretty strong partners in the game that have just been waiting, very patiently I might add, for Psychic type acceleration. And there are plenty of ways that we're going to see that as we go forward as well. This card is very strong. It did do very well in the few tournaments that we had at this sort of time. But I just want to stress that this is not the tier 0 sort of card that it reads as. It's good, but not that good. Yeah, and that is kind of everything here. There's a bunch of... We've now sort of gotten to the point where it's like we have a couple of triangle formats sort of things coming in here, because we have Psychic Pokemon that are weak to Dark, that are then resistant to Fighting. The Fighting Pokemon that are played are weak to Psychic, so there is that. And the best Dark type that we have for general purpose is the Eternatus, which is weak to Fighting. So you kind of have that little triangle format bit going on there. There's a little bit with like fire and stuff as well, but it doesn't really see very much play at this stage. And it is worth noting that a lot of the new Dark type Pokemon are weak to grass instead, but they generally are frail enough that you can KO them with the fighting type stuff anyway. So yeah, but there's a little bit of a triangle format going on at this point. It's pretty funny that it ends up that way. And yeah, we'll just have to see how that sort of pans out. Maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. Maybe we'll just try and avoid it. Who knows? Anyway, around it, there's a lot of cool cards in this set. I'm very excited to see where we end up with this one. We've had like 1 test session so far. We've played quite a few different cool things in here. I still don't know exactly what I want to play out of this yet, but I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of it as we go. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you found this interesting. Until next time,